Well, thank you all very much for coming out tonight, virtual audience. Thank you for joining us for the book launch of Tooth and Claw. Now you know why we have wine, because we're going to have a little toast here, Craig and I, to all of you for coming.
Cheers.
Yep. And to Walt, right? And Henry. And
So
they're
what did you guys do to get put in the cheap seats over here? What happened? They had to isolate you over here by yourselves and everything like that? I know these two. Look at so
okay. So this
this
is
guy here too.
yeah. Yes, he wanted to help with the wine. So this is actually the wine that Craig ordered at dinner last night, which we didn't entirely finish. So I thought since he'd already picked it out, he'd be happy to drink it again, right? Here we are. But it certainly demanded a toast. So how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Do I need this? Okay, I
Yes.
should use it, right?
You
Okay,
have
okay.
to use it
All right.
because of the camera down there, right?
All right.
So what we're going to talk about tonight with Tooth and Claw, which is, as you know,
Can we do something first? Can I
do
do
whatever you
something
want.
real quick?
Of course.
For the first time in 20 years, my wife is not here with me. So if there's trouble later tonight, you know who's responsible, all right? But the thing is like every year I give her the opportunity, because like at one point in time in the tour, we end up in Philadelphia, which is where, the granddaughter is. And so I always give her the option. I always say, okay, you can either trail along with me on these 5 a.m. flights if you want. She really hates those. Or, you can go on ahead, and be in Philadelphia with your granddaughter, who's like, it's her senior year in high school. So she's going off to college next year. And so grandma's a little antsy about all this. And so I said, but you can. You want to do that? Would you prefer to do that? And she finally took me up on it. She actually went. And of course, she doesn't leave until tomorrow. And guess what the weather's doing in Wyoming right now? It's snowing about 40 miles an hour sideways. So maybe her plane will go out, maybe it won't go out, and boy, I'm in trouble because I'm responsible for the weather in Wyoming, of course, as we all know. But what I would like to do is I would like to pull up my phone here for a moment and have you guys all say, "Hi, Judy." If you would be kind enough to do that for me. So hold on a second here. Out of Dutch here with the wife here. So maybe for just a short period of time here. Okay. When I give you the word, you do it, okay? Just say, "Hi, Judy." Hi, Judy! Fantastic. You guys take direction really well. Wow. Actors and actresses here in Arizona, I got a sneaking suspicion.
Right. Well, one can tell that you'd really just like to be a director, not an author.
That's about as far as my directing skills go right there.
So Craig showed me the Wyoming snow on the video, and I was thinking, this is our revenge, right, for the summer of 119, is while we're sitting here in comfort with the air conditioning slightly on.
Now, I got to tell you, though, when I got the rental car yesterday, I picked up the rental car. It was like about 6 p.m., I guess it was. And I climb in, and the heat is on. I turn the heat off first thing, right? It's 65 degrees. I turn the heat off. And then the steering wheel heat was on. And then the seat heat was on. And I don't know how to turn that stuff off. For guys, so I'm driving along, trying to get to the restaurant, sweating, from every pore in my body. I was like, good grief, really?
You heard the part about 119, so you have to understand that at 65, we're cold.
Your blood's very thin down
cold.
here, I got to tell you.
It's actually not
You guys might want to wait till daytime to read this book. I don't know. Just a thought.
It's very true. I was going to say there's actual fact for the thought that great heat does actually, people get accustomed to it, because it used to be in the British Empire when they would send their sons and daughters to India and they all had to survive, and they would come back to England and they would die in huge numbers from pneumonia and all, because they just couldn't take the British climate after living in India for years. So,
do you know that the British consulate, that the people from England that serve, in Washington D.C. get tropical pay?
They do.
They do. They consider Washington, D.C. to be tropical. So
Well,
I was
it's
like,
a
wow.
swamp. It is a swamp, so we already know
That's
that
weird.
that part's okay. Anyway, I mean, I've got a leather jacket in the back room. I get cold at this temperature, so too bad. But we're going to Alaska. But what I wanted to do, because so many of the books are Walt going forward from whatever time you picked at the beginning. Tell us more about, because this is really Walt coming out of the Vietnam War, he and Henry, and heading to Alaska to the North Slope. But go back and tell us about Walt going to the Vietnam War.
Well, it came about by accident like that, because I started this little novella. This is another novella in the line of Spirit of Steamboat and The Highwayman. But I started on it it was supposed to be out about 5 years ago, when I started on it. And generally I write these books and boom, they're done, they come out. But I set this one aside because it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. It was kind of a new experience for me, because generally the books do what I want them to do. But this one just wasn't quite turning out the way that I wanted it to turn out. And so I started thinking about after I'd set it aside, for a couple of years there, I just completely forgot about it. And then I found it, again, and pulled it out, was rereading it. And one of the things I do when I write the books is I write the acknowledgments for the book before I even start writing the book. And the reason for that is that I know why I wrote the book. And that sounds kind of stupid, but when you're working on a project for the better part of a year, sometimes you forget, what was the catalyst? What was the reason behind, doing this book? And so what first thing I did was go back and find the acknowledgments. And I had to laugh like that because the first thing I mentioned in the acknowledgments was Alastair MacLean. And the whole idea behind this little book was I wanted to write a thriller. And I didn't want to write one of those, 500-page thrillers where I tend to refer to them as mysteries with a lobotomy, is what I tend to refer to them. Because you basically know who did it in the first couple of chapters. And then it's just a chase, for the next 450 pages. And very few authors, in my opinion, can get away with writing 450 pages of chase and having it still be interesting like that. And what was great about Alastair MacLean, well, first of all, I'm always kind of shocked, because you don't know how many places I've been where, I mentioned Alastair MacLean and people look at me blankly and don't have any idea who he is or what he wrote or anything like that. And so then what I do is I go, have you seen the movie Force 10 from Navarone? Have you seen Ice Station Zebra? Have you seen Where Eagles Dare? Like that, which I would say is in my top 20 movies of all time. That is a really great adventure thriller. I mean, whenever you can put Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton together, and make it work, that was really something like that. But, I thought, what was great about his stuff was there's a really great review that they had about his books, and it might have even been at his obituary. There was a reviewer that said he's one of those guys that hits you with everything but the kitchen sink, and then throws the kitchen sink in on top of you, and then just as soon as you raise your head, hits you with the plumber too. And I thought, that's a great review, all right? And so, and he was really, really good at it because he had these ramped up, pacings with his books, really interesting international kind of characters. And then he kept you guessing all the way through till the end. I mean, if you're watching Where Eagles Dare and you get to that scene, where they have the Nazi generals and everybody, in that room and they're trying to figure out who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, your head is spinning by the time that scene is over with like that. And so, it was wonderful how he could take those, those aspects of mystery, which are so wonderful, and why it is that it survives and is one of the, highest selling, genres that there are, and include them in a thriller, enough so that it really held your attention all the way through and kept you guessing till the end. And so between that and wanting it to have more of a sense of humor, because the first draft of this book was very, very serious. And I don't like writing serious books. I like having a sense of humor because for me, the book becomes much more serious if the characters have a sense of humor because they're fighting for their lives in this book. with one very direct antagonist and then a couple of ancillary antagonists to go along with it too. So, and that's when I picked it back up and thought maybe I'll write this.
I was pretty sure that you'd overdosed on Ice Station Zebra
Hey,
when
I'm
you were,
telling you, like,
which is
I've done enough of those trips fishing in Alaska to know, like, basically the way I describe Alaska is I describe it as Wyoming on steroids is what I describe it as. Like it, so
yeah, it's probably snowing even harder as we speak somewhere in
yeah.
Alaska. Although with global warming, I mean, I remember the first time I went to Greenland, you just got to land at Kotortak, which is a little place at the bottom of Greenland, and that felt really adventurous and whatever it is. And now they're circumnavigating Greenland on cruise ships. That's how fast that things, have changed.
Yeah.
So better to write about Alaska while you can.
In 1969 and 70.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
So, yeah.
I mean, Glacier Bay is like, it's like Glacier Park.
Yeah.
The glaciers are extinct.
But to answer your original question,
Yes.
like that, before I went off on a couple of tangents there, it accidentally turned into the year of bookending Vietnam, is what it was. Like, because First Frost is that first frost, where Walt and Henry basically come to a sense of their own mortality, that maybe they aren't going to live forever, and so Vietnam looms large at that point in time. Well, this book takes place immediately after Vietnam, like that, whereas these two guys took very different, made very different choices, post-Vietnam. Walt goes to, the North Slope of Alaska to do security on the oil rigs. And his argument is that I just, wanted to go someplace and cool off. Well, he got his wish, okay? And then Henry, on the other hand, went to the Champagne region of France and learned how to, make wine and do champagne. So I don't know if I think maybe Henry might have made the better decision. I don't know, as it turns out. So.
Probably, overall more useful, right? I know. How did you get Henry back to Wyoming if he was, frolicking in France?
We had I had my grandfather and his brothers all fought in World War II, and there was one uncle that I had, one great uncle, and he landed I think in Anzio, and chased Germans all the way up, Italy, and then through France and into Germany. And then we lost him for a couple of years because he discovered French women. And, I guess the whole family never heard from him for a couple of years. And then finally he ended up coming back like that. But, yeah, it's an occupational hazard, like I have to say.
I mean, the French have always been fascinated with the West. I did an event. If any of you look at our Facebook videos or YouTube videos, there was an author, a French author Patrick and I did an event with her last week, and her English is pretty good. None of her books, I mean, it was all for the French because none of her books are translated into English. You can only buy them on Amazon.fr or, Librairie Galibert, which you well know. And it was payback because the Alliance Française came and hosted Martin Walker when I was away this fall. So it was kind of a trade. It's interesting to me to see that several hundred people have watched it. And one of the things we talked about was the fact the French have been so fascinated with the American West. In fact, you sent me to Cody to, Buffalo Bill and all of that. And that was, he took his whole show to France.
Oh, yeah.
It was a really big thing. You are a big thing in France, with French readers.
Not as big as Buffalo Bill like that, but, yeah. But yeah, he doesn't get the credit, like nowadays, it's popular to kind of make fun of him as like this showman, and all that. But he really, he had quite a career before, he started doing those Wild West shows. But I think he's really kind of responsible for kind of implanting that, image of the epic, romantic American West, in the rest of the world like that, because that's the imagery that they have, of a lot of the American West. And it's holding still, today like that. A lot of I've got a really great translator and a really great publisher in France, which makes, a really big difference like that. But then also, in many ways, they're very curious curious to the fact of how did it all turn out? What is the American West like now? And so that's where I get a lot of readers like that who read the books like that. And I don't know, they've got I tend to refer to it as the French bullshit meter. They have an extraordinary, ability to tell bullshit, from a long way away. And so they get the feeling like, I guess when they read the books, that they feel like these characters are more realistic than a lot of the stuff that they've read about the American West. Like that there's more complexity to the characters, and more humanity to them, which is very flattering. But it's interesting like that, because they're into the contemporary American West, which is kind of fun for me.
But I actually brought all that up. I was still thinking about Henry. How interested the French must have been in Henry, if I mean, we're talking about him like a real person, right? That actually went to France and learned how to make. I mean, that's the thing, when we have these conversations, I think for most of us, the characters we're talking about are real. We have to think of it that way. So if Henry, who was an interesting exemplar of the American West, was hanging around in France, I'm surprised they let him come back.
Oh well, and we've been over to France. I think we've been there 32 times now. Yeah, at one point in time we were going like 4 times a year. And it's wonderful, to be translated, and to be, and to have your books translated into other languages. But it's another thing to be on like the bestsellers lists like that, which is really kind of wonderful too. And while my wife is sitting there at home in the blizzard in Ucross, Wyoming, population 25, she also knows that she's probably going to go to France again in April. So that really kind of saved my marriage. All those trips to Paris, I got to tell you, like
April in Paris.
Yeah, those trips to Gillette and Casper were not cutting the mustard. I got to tell you, like that. So
I can see that. Although I've been to visit you, stayed at your ranch, the whole bit. It's interesting. Is anybody else hearing a weird echo? Patrick, there's an echo out here in the room. Have you got the soundtrack so that it's bleeding over into here? I thought for a minute somebody had their phone on, but no. So it's gone away? Okay. I mean, I thought I was losing it there. You didn't hear it either? Right. All right.
I've almost finished my wine, so I thought that was just that.
Well,
that's what I thought the echo was.
No. There's more. There's definitely more. Huh? Yeah, we can hear the sound. Is it coming off the Facebook recording? How weird. I don't remember that ever happening before. Well, Craig, you do interesting things. It's always an adventure with Craig. Anyway, so we know from First Frost, we know part of how, Henry and Walt went to Vietnam, but start when Walt was a little kid and go forward. We don't really ever got a chance to. Have
we
you
don't
even
have time
thought
for
about
all
it?
that. Look at that! Oh my
sure
gosh!
We do.
I mean, I can start. What I can do is tell you how they got to Alaska. Is what I'll tell you. Like, I mean, obviously,
you're skipping years.
Well, I mean, we would be here till like 4 o'clock in the morning, like that, for me to cover all that ground. I mean, I've got a steady arc like that I started with, with the cold dish, like that, and I mean, it even mentions, in the very first book 20 years ago, Walt talks about working up in Alaska, and doing security detail like that for these oil rigs. And, he's very good at what he does like that, but he's kind of world weary at this point in time. You're getting 2 very, very different Walt Longmires this year, because you're getting that very innocent, college kid Walt Longmire in First Frost, and then you're getting the, combat hardened veteran, Walt from Vietnam like that in Tooth and Claw. So it's 2 very, very different. It's interesting though, because I mean that's one of the pivotal points in the characters' lives. I mean, something happened, that changed them from the trajectory that they were on. And so it was very fun for me to have both those books come out this year, because you're kind of bookending, their experiences in Vietnam like that. But Walt, after this and after Vietnam and the experiences that he has on Johnston Atoll, which I have not written about yet, but are also out there in the far flung distance to be written too. He's a little world weary, and he's drinking way too much, like that, from which I understand, in Alaska on the North Slope can be a problem like that. And he's drinking way too much like that. And what happens is Martha, his, fiance or ex-fiance at that point in time, sends Henry up to Alaska to do a kind of an intervention. to kind of wrestle the bottle away from Walt a little bit. But it's a very different kind of Walt that we get in this book, simply because he's kind of the sarcastic, funny, world-weary character like that he very rarely is, in all of the other novels. This is a very different Walt, and so he gets to be the kind of funny guy, as far as this is concerned, and a little bit, he's kind of ruthless, a little bit too. He's seen some ruthlessness, and he's seen what it is that needs to be done for them to survive this situation that they find themselves in, and the situation is pretty dire. I've put Walt in some bad situations before like that, but this might be maybe the worst situation I've ever put him in like that. Of course, Henry comes up, there, and, he's, trying to, work Walt away from the bottle and all this. He's only there for a couple of days, but, they're stuck in this room drinking and playing chess. And, that's not what Henry's there for. He's trying to, get Walt out and away like that. And, of course, what happens is Walt gets this, opportunity to go out with the U.S. Geologic team. They have to do these ice core samples out on the big ice. And so they're going to need a security detail, and they're going to need all these people to go with them in this C-130 clamshell. And so they take off with it, with this thiokol buggy in the back. And, of course, things can't go easy, or else it wouldn't be an interesting novel, right? One of these days I'm going to write a book where Walt just plays pinochle on his desk, for 300 pages. It's going to be called No Mystery. But, for now, I'm still, working the plots through like that. And, they get out there, and some very bad things happen like that. And they find themselves in a kind of a dire situation without any form of protection. And basically the way it works is that, you find yourself out, in that environment without shelter, you're going to die. It's as simple as that. And so I don't want to give too much away as far as the book is concerned like that, but they actually find shelter. And the form of shelter that they find is a ship called the SS Beishimo. Look it up. When you get back to your internet, look it up. It's probably one of the most storied and legendary ghost ships in the history of the Arctic. It was built by Sweden, boat rights, and built for the Germans, and then in reparations for World War I, it was taken from the Germans, and the British took the ship, and they used it, for, to ply the trades up there in the Arctic Ocean to pick up furs, as that was their job, to go to all these different villages and trade, for furs. And they did like that. And the problem is at one point in time, it got trapped in the ice, and they had to abandon the ship because it was going to get crushed by the big ice. And so they evacuated, the whole crew and got them out of there. And then the ship disappeared. And then 10 years later, the ship reappeared. And people went on board and found everything like that there. I mean, my gosh, there were brandy glasses still sitting on the captain's, table and everything like that. And then, of course, like that, they couldn't get the ship, to land. And so they had to evacuate it again like that. And the ship disappeared again. And then 10 years later, it appeared again. And this has happened all the way through. And the last sighting of it was actually in 1969, 1970, which fits perfectly with my story. And so there they are trying to take shelter, on this, ghost ship, basically. And SS stands for steamship is what it stands for. And so, they're trying to take shelter on the ship. And, of course, they run into probably Walt's worst adversary ever. There's an old saying about bear fighting. If it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lay down. If it's white, say goodnight. It's the only predator that actively hunts human beings because it simply doesn't fear us. It doesn't have enough interaction with us to be afraid of us. And I had a friend of mine who was a Yupik native up there, and he had a son like that got a job as one of the spotters. And what the spotters do basically when these big teams go out, whether they're doing oil exploration or ice, ice section coverings and things like that, the first thing they do when they land the plane is they bring these towers out and set the towers up. And they're like these aluminum tube towers that are about 10, 12 feet tall. And then on the top up there, they've got a swivel seat with a rifle bar that goes all the way around. with a scope. And what their job is to spot the polar bears before they spot you. Because they literally will come in, they're hungry enough like that if somebody's out lying a little bit, they'll just grab them and run off with them and eat them. And so, basically their job is to fire off warning shots, which really don't have that much of an effect because these bears have not had any kind of interactions with firearms either. So they're not afraid of guns. So it's a bad situation to find yourself in like that. And so they have to kind of like fend those bears off till they can get the work done and then load back up and get back out of there as quick as they can. But so what happens, of course, is Walt can't meet an average polar bear. There's no way. That's not possible. And so what they come across is almost a throwback to an ancestor of previous to the polar bears that we have nowadays. There was an even larger version of polar bear. That was a predecessor for the polar bears that we have now. Some of them almost 14 feet tall. And I've faced off with like a 10-foot bear, and that was big enough for me. But there's something wrong with this bear. It's been damaged, or it's been in a fire or something. They're not quite sure what it is like that. But what it's, kind of like fallen back on is now it's become an ambush predator where it lays in wait. And where does it lay in wait? On the SS Beishimo. And that's the only place that they have to go to try and survive. And so anyway.
Well, there is another book coming, so it is not a complete surprise that everybody survives. I think the cover of Tooth and Claw kind of, that's the Alaskan native that one meets, right?
Yes.
Right, drawn from real life. But I was saying to Craig at dinner last night, I find it really interesting. There is on Instagram, there's a video of a little polar bear cub that is hanging onto the rail of I guess it's a Coast Guard cutter, and so they bring him. Have you seen it? They bring him up on board, and whatever. So he's going to be a little bear that has been around humans, and it'll be interesting to see whether his bear nature is overcome or not.
Yes, it will. Yes,
He'd
it will.
probably end up in a zoo.
Well, probably which is, and there's like a bear cub that they save like that, because one of the little known facts about polar bears is they are cannibalistic like that. There's just not enough of a food source that far north that like anything that moves, they'll eat it. It's as simple as that. And it even means each other, like in many ways. So it's kind of it's a tough environment to be in. One of the most, excruciating environments you can think of, on this planet, in many ways. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens, with that bear like that.
Well, polar bears are in many ways kind of doomed because their whole environment is disappearing on them.
Yeah,
and their food source and whatever.
Well, and what they're finding is that they're actually cross mating like that with the big browns like that, the Kodiaks like that, and all this. So
and adapting.
Hopefully they'll adopt the better qualities of both rather than the bad qualities of both like that. So
that's an interesting thought, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. So, what else is there to say?
This was a really fun book to write, I got to admit, because once you hit the ground running and things start happening, man, it's a full blown run all the way through till the end. And I didn't know, because I remember when I wrote, Spirit of Steamboat, I wrote this little book, and it was like 160 pages long. And I wrote it like that, and I turned it into Viking Penguin, and they weren't really excited about it. They were like, can you pad it out and make it a full-size novel? And I was like, no, that'll ruin it. It starts, it hits the ground running and goes all the way to the end. Like, no, I'm not going to pad it out like that, And so then, of course, that one came out and it made the New York Times bestsellers list. Well, it wasn't that hard to sell them Highwayman, the second one, because the first one sold as well as it did. And so anyway, like that, we did Highwayman. And so then I came out with this one like that. And for the last 5 years, Viking Penguin's been, don't you have another novella? Don't you have another novella that you want to do? Look at, and I was like, yeah, I got one on the back burner like that. And finally, when I got it done like that, and I remember handing it in to Brian Tard, who's like the president of Penguin and Viking like that. And generally, it takes him a couple of days to get back to me. He wrote me back the day I sent it to him and said, this is incredible. This is a really great little book. He said, man alive. He said, I read it in one sitting. I sat down and wrote all it was like 190 some pages. Like, and he said, I sat down and read the whole thing in one shot. So that was kind of flattering. Like that, and I thought, okay, well then maybe it doesn't suck after all. Like that, so
there's actually a trend towards smaller books coming along. I don't know if you've all noticed it. Part of it may be dictated by the fact that paper has become so expensive that they're cutting back. But if you really go back to the golden age of crime, those books are quite slender. Agatha Christie's ideal book was 132 pages because she wanted you to be able to read it between dinner and bed. And she was forced to make them slightly larger. But I mean, these really big thrillers and all are, I think we're going to see them shrink, partly because the other part is that readers' attention is not what it used to be. And we're all constantly interrupted by social media or whatever. So I think there is going to be kind of a movement back. When I opened the store, there were a lot of small books. They were also attractively priced, I might add, at like, $19 or $15.95.
They're also open to other markets too, like that. Because I mean, I think also one of the reasons why Agatha Christie did the shorter versions too was she was always looking at the possibility of turning them into plays. Because she was a playwright too, like, and so I think that was on her mind, like, and then also like it with Hollywood, those poor studio executives, they get past 100 pages, and they just lose their interest, like it, and so that's an awful lot of it too.
Have you never heard Don Winslow's story?
Oh,
it's
no.
one of my very favorite. Don Winslow, one of his books. Anyway, he was summoned to a group, studio meeting in Hollywood where they were going to discuss whether or not they were going to make one of his books into a movie. And just to make conversation, there were some books on the head guy's desk. And just to make conversation as Don was leaving, he said something to the man about, are any of the books in there, something you've really enjoyed? And the guy looked at Don and he said, I have people who read my books. And I thought, okay, I mean, yeah. Where we are. Anyway, I'm not. Tell us about your short story collections because you have done those for, or there are those that you've done for Christmas, like your Christmas story.
Well, the original one was actually it was we were sitting there at the ranch, and my wife Judy had a copy of Cowboys and Indians magazine, and she spun it around and slid it under my coffee mug, and she said, "You should do this." Well, now, only those of us that have been married for a certain amount of time know how easily you can disregard the phrase, you should do this, right? And so, I looked down, like, and it was a call for submissions to the, see if I can get this right, Cowboy and Indians Magazine Tony Hillerman Mystery Short Story Contest. And I swear, like, a lot of the submissions were not as long as the title of the contest, like, for goodness sake. And so she said, you should do that. Like, because one of the things was you got to go have dinner with Tony Hillerman. And so, I looked at her and I was like, I don't write short stories. I've never written a short story in my life. Like, I'm not going to, start now. Like, I'm writing novels. Like, and so, but she knows me. And she knows all you have to do is like plant the idea, the seed of the idea, and then it'll start, getting germination like it after a while. And so I'm down there shoveling out the barn like that. And you guys all know, if you've ever lived that kind of lifestyle, just how much free time in your mind you have, when you're doing that kind of work. And so I'm shoveling out the barn and I was thinking, okay, well, if I was to write a short story, what would I write it about? And I remembered an instance like it, and I thought, okay, yeah, that would work. And so I came back up like that and I wrote the short story, and to make a long story short, it won. And so I got to go have dinner with Tony Hillerman like that, which was really kind of wonderful. And it came out in Cowboys and Indians magazine, which was wonderful too, like, because a lot of people had not heard of me at that point in time. I only had like one book out. And so it was really kind of great like that. But then it dawned on me that there's really nothing more useless to an author than an already published short story, because it's already been published, so it's of no use to you at all. You really can't do anything with it or anything like it. And so, I had this thing like that. Well, then what happened was it came up around Christmas the next year. And I thought at that point in time, I think I had about 2,000 or 3,000 people on the Post-it list. And I thought, I could just send that out to everybody, for Christmas. They just get up on Christmas morning, and then there'll be a gift, a short story about Walt Longmire. Let people know how much I appreciate, how much they follow the books and support me in my writing. And that was back in the day when you had to type in all of the addresses. So I was like typing in addresses on the emails till like about 3:00 in the morning, and, sent them off like that and went to bed. And Judy, because I got to bed so late, I was still asleep. And so Judy came downstairs and opened up the computer and opened up the email, and thousands of responses like that were coming in. It was like, brrr, and I hear her. She goes, "What did you do?" But it just became tradition, like, and so every year that's what I do. If people are on the post-it list, I send them out, the Christmas story every Christmas morning. Like, don't try and get it on Christmas Eve. I'm not going to do that stuff. And so the rules are rules. Okay, and so anyway, like that, I started doing it, and I got about I have 15 or 16, I think, short stories. And I approached Viking Penguin and I said, "Hey, do you guys want to do an anthology of these?" And they said yes. And so the first anthology came out. It's called Wait for Signs. And that one came out. And now I'm about 17 or 18 short stories down the road. And so probably next year there'll be another anthology of short stories. And the short story for this year was I got to get this in because it's pretty funny. I was staying with I was over in Ten Sleep, Wyoming, and I was doing a library event over in Ten Sleep. And they put us in this little bed and breakfast. And the guy that runs the bed and breakfast, he and his wife, their specialty is sourdough bread. They do sourdough bread. And I don't know anything about baking or anything like that. And they were explaining to me they had made this it was like cranberry walnut sourdough bread, and man, it was good, And so I was asking them about it, and they were explaining how you have to have these starters, for sourdough bread, and that families have sourdough starters, that go back 100 years, or something. As a matter of fact, there's even one that they found in Egypt, in these terracotta pots that's 4,500 years old, this one starter. And I'm listening to them tell this story, and I was like, oh, this is a Walt Longmire short story is what this is. And so what happens is Ruby goes on this cruise, a holiday cruise, and Walt is responsible for taking care of the starter on a Christmas Eve. And it's his worst nightmare, because he's got all this stuff happening on, Christmas Eve, but he's got to take care of the starter too. And so it's called Starter's End is what the name of the short story is this year. And, generally the short stories are about 12 pages long. It's a short story. It's about 12 pages long. This one's 24 pages long already. And, because what happens is all the things that happen during the course of this Christmas Eve, you had to include those things. You can't just talk about them. They have to happen, of course. And so there's one instance where these kids are trying to break in the skylight of the IGA, and they all get away except for the one 7-year-old that couldn't reach the rope, and Walt, captures the kid, and the kid has an old pulp detective novel in his back pocket. I think it's called The Cocktail Waitress. It's one of those really, old, popular, and he talks like Al Capone, this 7-year-old. He talks like, he's a gangster or something from the 1930s. And Walt can't get an honest answer out of him about where he lives and what his real name is and all this kind of stuff. So he's got to drive around with the starter, the dog, and the 7-year-old as he's doing everything on Christmas Eve. And then he's looking for his backup, right, Vic? He's like, where in the hell is Vic? And he's like, she responded to a fight that was going on, in an apartment building over near the Come and Go. And so Walt's like, that was hours ago. What's going on? And they're like, well, the fight's still going on. And it's like, Walt's, what kind of a fight is still going on an hour later? And they said, it's a drunk woman fighting with an inflatable snowman. And of course, Walt gets there and discovers that what's happened is there was a party up on the balcony, and they were shouting stuff down at Vic as she was trying to arrest the woman, and they were all betting their money on the woman. And Vic, says, "Okay, well, I'll take all your bets. I'm betting on the inflatable snowman is what I'm betting on." And so by the time Walt gets there, she's made $83.43. And so this is all going on while the starter thing is happening too. So it's turned into this epic Christmas short story. So I hope you guys will enjoy it on Christmas morning.
Pretty soon it'll be a novella.
Yeah.
It will be. Well, that's good because those are nice short Walt Longmire things too.
Yeah.
What I found interesting in part about the juxtaposition of these two books is they come after the Longmire defense, which is the other end of Walt.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yep.
And that was an interesting one to write because it tells us so much about Walt's familial past and this individual that we've heard a little bit about, but not a lot about. His grandfather, who, as it turns out, was very formulaic, in making Walt the man that he is today. And it's always interesting to me like that because one of my favorite things is we think you meet somebody, you think you know them now. You don't know them 30 years ago or 20 years from now. We all have an arc like that we have, and your interaction with them at some point in that arc is going to, it's going to identify, like, and inform what you think that person is or who you think that person is. And sometimes we're terribly, terribly wrong.
Yeah, but that's exactly what happens when you start a series. That's exactly what happens, is that there is that character in that moment in time. And you either write him forward or you can write him backward or whatever. But it is the same, you, the author, get to know the character as you write him, right?
Well, and I think that, also, you make a certain number of discoveries if you're lucky like that. I think that, if they're, and there are writers like that just start a series and boom, that's where it starts and it just chronologically goes on from there. What I discovered is like, I remember, whenever I wrote Kindness Goes Unpunished, like that takes place almost exclusively in Philadelphia, for goodness sake. Like, everybody was a little worried. They were like, well, everybody wants the Wyoming books. They don't want to see Walt, in back east in a big city or something. And I'm like, well, that's where you learn about a character, when you take them out of their environment and put them somewhere else like that. That makes it much more interesting. And then, not only do you find that geographically you can move around, but you can also move around chronologically. Mm-hmm. You can move into the character's past and find those moments, where they became who it is that they are. And it's very interesting to me because, I come on, I've spent 21 novels, 3 novellas, and 2 collections of short stories with Walt Longmire, and he hasn't gotten bored. I haven't got bored with him yet. And hopefully you guys aren't either like that, But I think one of the key elements is to free yourself up and know that you can take chances and do some different stuff. Even, with this little novella, it's a plain flat out thriller, with mystery elements in it, so it's something a little bit different each time. But I don't want to insult your intelligence by being formulaic and just writing the same kind of book over and over and over again, because you're going to spend, a week, a couple of days, with one of my books. That book's with me for a year. So, man, it better hold at my interest, or else, I'm going to fail miserably, with holding up your interest in it. So,
I think it's interesting that this book is not labeled a prequel, because in most cases in a series, when the author goes back in time before you met the character, they're called, prequels. And I've often said that one of my all-time favorite prequel was written by Charles Finch, who went to write a prequel about his Victorian characters, and he enjoyed it so much he wrote a trilogy prequel. It was, whoops, did anybody got hit by the, sorry, there was a book that just dove, oh dear.
Leapt from the shelf, wow.
Right. But I think it's really, must be almost irresistible to an author to go back and explore the character once you get to know them better, what made them like that. And you don't really get to do that in the first book in a series.
Oh, yeah. No, I think absolutely like that. And the opportunity like that to go find out, who they were and what they are like that. And who were the people in their lives at that period in time like that. That's always a joy.
But what I'm saying is that instead of calling this a prequel, you just have a sort of constantly mixed up timeline.
Yeah. No, I just jump right in.
It's all different.
Well, the other thing is like it's also bookended. This one actually was a little bit different from some of the other previous novels that I've done before, because this one starts, on a Christmas Eve like that with Walt and Henry and Lucian, the older sheriff like that, and Walt and Henry are playing chess, and Henry does something like that, makes a chess move, and Walt's the very first line of the book is what is that? And Henry's like, oh, that's my move. And what it is, it's called the polar bear defense is what it's called. And so then they start talking about, which is very easy to do, bear stories. Everybody loves bear stories. And so they start talking about this bear story, and Henry says something about, about polar bears like that. And Lucian's like, you've never met a polar bear in your life like that. And Henry looks at Walt like that, and they kind of share this look. And Lucian's like, I get the feeling there's a story here that I haven't heard. And so he starts, Walt starts in telling them the story about what it was that happened back in 1971.
So the other thing that you all are accepting, think about this. This is 1970, and Walt is still going strong in 2024. He has not yet aged out of the sheriff's office.
Is it 2024 though? I mean, that's the
So-
question.
So the other
Is
thing,
it actually 2024
Yeah.
or is it not? Because if it takes me 4 books to get through 1 year of Walt's life like that, if you go back and look, well, what was the publication date of The Cold Dish? And you only move forward 5 years. And then the big question is, people are always like, yeah, but you're going to get stumbled up by technology. And I'm like, not in Wyoming, I'm not. I can always tell whenever somebody comes up to me and they're not from Wyoming, they'll ask me, why doesn't Walt have a cell phone? And I'm like, you've never been to Wyoming, have you? So,
don't you really think it's kind of an implicit bargain that readers make with authors that, think about Spencer. He was a Korean War veteran when it started.
Yeah.
And now, Mike Lupica and I are going to be talking about Spencer. It's a great news, Spencer, on the 25th of November. And Spencer's, still in the gym, still solving cases. So he's like 100 and whatever. And nobody.
That's a man's man there, I tell you.
But my point is that, you think about Michael Connelly and Harry, okay?
Uh-huh.
So, or you think about Ian Rankin and
Rebus.
Right. And they have aged them in real time, and they have aged out largely of what they were able to do.
Yeah.
Whereas Spencer is still, the scourge of, Boston criminals.
Well, you get
And readers are fine with either. That's
there was a
what's
big article
interesting.
actually in the New York Times, where they talked about the aging aspect of detective characters, and I thought it was a very wonderful article. I have to admit, like that. But yeah, for me, like that, the way I combat it is that Walt's only 5 years older than when we first met him. Here like that, back in the Cold Dish. But it's funny like that because I'll get these emails from people who will, literally, they will sit down and they'll go, okay, in the Cold Dish, Walt mentions that he played in the Rose Bowl against Wisconsin in this particular date, in this particular year. That would be that year. And then they go through the whole thing. And it'll be like 2 pages of dates, of everything. And then they'll be like, and so that must mean that Walt is this age. And I write them back and I'm like, sure. And they're like, you don't have anything to say about that. And I'm like, nope. Nope. And talk to the person sitting next to you because they're going to have a different math than you do. So.
I mean, as a reader, I'm perfectly fine, with how all this works out. But I just find it interesting, that we get so invested in characters and then we kind of, real time kind of like floats away.
Well,
unless
it's
the author
a willful
insists
suspense of disbelief. That is what it is.
Just like this
I said.
election. Absolutely. Yeah. The same thing.
Because whenever somebody writes me one of those 2-page jobs, I'd always write them back and go, sure. And they're like, well, you don't agree or what? And I'm like, do you want me to kill him? And then they write back and go, no. And I'm like, well, then we're in accordance here then, aren't we?
But the person who's even older is Lucian.
Yeah.
How old is Lucian at this point? He was old when we started.
Oh yeah, and even some of the other characters, is he ever going to die or what? But the interesting thing is though, I also have to admit that you become connected to certain characters, and it's even worse that whenever you become connected to characters because they're based off of people that you know. Ruby is based off my mother. Lucian is based off my father. And so it would be very, very difficult for me to, off those characters. Very, very difficult. The only one that will live forever will be Dog, I have to admit, because Judy says she will divorce me if I ever hurt the dog. And I actually had a storyline that I thought of which was these Walt's, at a gas station or something with Henry in that convertible and this van pulls up and they go in to pay for gas and come out, the dog is gone. And what's happened is it's a group of dog fighters that you pit dogs to get fighting against each other, and they take one look at Dog and grab the dog and take off with him and they have to go after him trying to get the dog back. And Judy looked at me and she was like, I will not read that book. And I was like, okay, all right. So that one got pitched out the window.
It's definitely a law that you can't kill the dog
or
the cat.
Yeah.
As it all happens. Other animals are at risk, but not the dog or the cat. You're
going to have to read this book to see if I killed a bear or not. That's it.
Well, okay. Is there any explanation for why the ship reappears?
There is. There's a scientific, there was a guy that wrote a book.
some kind of circular.
Yeah, the
ocean
Beaufort
currents?
gyre, like that, that's mentioned
A
in the
gyre?
books, like that. Yeah, and what it is I had to laugh like that because one of how I discovered the SS Beishimo was my father had like magazines up in the attic, of like National Geographic, World News, all these old magazines that used to have these really incredible essay, not pieces in them and everything. And I think my favorite quote about that was Irma Bombeck, who said, "Nobody ever succeeded in cleaning out an attic who could read." Because you get up there and you say, "Oh, that's a good episode. That's a good issue. I got to reread that article." And then pretty soon you're just sitting there reading like every 4 or 5 hours, like that. So. But there was an article in the World News, like in that magazine, and it was about the SS Beishimo, like that about how it it pops up every 10 years or so. And so I found this book that this guy wrote about the ship, and he had done some research on it. Excuse me, and basically what he said was that this thing in the Beaufort Sea, like that, in the Arctic Circle, has with the size of it. It has a 10-year cycle going around, and it takes 10 years. And there are these chunks of ice that are floating in the Beaufort Sea that are like, 1,000 years old, like at a couple of thousand years old. They've literally, when they've broken free from the gyre, they've pulled them off like that and found bones and, remains of animals that have been dead, for thousands of years. And so it was really interesting to me, that this ship, could be up there caught in that gyre and reappear, every 10 years, like that, almost like clockwork, which is really kind of interesting, to think about. And then, of course, this take place in 1971, and so it was interesting to me, that the other thing is that nobody could see this thing and find it. In those periods in time, people do periodically find it because it appears. But the other thing, I was talking to a friend of mine and who worked for NASA, and he says, it's a lot harder to find that kind of stuff up there than you think it is. And I said, really, with all the satellites and all this kind of stuff? And he goes, Craig, it's covered with snow. It's covered with ice in a snow and ice environment. And he said, you could look on those, you could look at what that comes off of those satellites, till your eyes fall out of your head and you'd never see it, for goodness sake, because it's the bad perspective. You just don't see it from up above. And it was interesting to do the research on all of that and discover that, boy, there's still some wilder, maybe even wilder than Wyoming places in the world. Look at
How can we say that? Why don't you
I
ask
know,
if
I know.
anybody has questions, since we have some time?
Absolutely. Right. Anybody got a question? Anything you'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
Is the character from Longmire Defense the half-sister
Uh-huh.
of, I guess, Longmire?
Right. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Ruthless, one heart.
Should be any more of your books?
Gee, what do you think? Yeah. I mean, she's got to. She's the only blood relative Walt has now, like that. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And we actually touch on that in Return to Sender, which is the book that comes out at the end of May. I think the 26th. You were telling me, I believe.
27th.
27th. Look at, see, look at that. So I just go out on the road when they tell me. I'm like a Fuller brush salesman, like that. So, but yeah, there's actually some interesting information like that comes to the light in Return to Sender.
Could you repeat the questions when they're
Yes, I will. I'm sorry. You'd think I've been doing this long enough, I would know that, wouldn't I? Like that. So, yes, sir. There actually already is a Vietnam book. The fourth book, Another Man's Moccasins. It's Walt's first homicide investigation at the Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. Uh-huh. You never can tell, but most certainly I'm going to do the Johnston Atoll aspect of after Walt, gets out, because the provost marshal is so sick of him, he sends him out of Vietnam and sends him to this rock out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Johnston Atoll, which has a very unique history on itself, like that. But yeah, and then if you haven't read the fourth book, Another Man's Moccasins, that's Walt's first homicide investigation, as one of the first Marine investigators. But up until that point, basically the Marines were just muscle for naval investigators. But around 67, 68, they started having their own investigators, and Walt was one of the first ones, which was kind of cool.
I'm going to bring the mic around so the people online can hear the questions.
Okay, because Craig's not doing a very good job of repeating the questions. Is what he just said, very, very gently. So,
Did you ever find out who was the number 26 in your town?
no, we have not. Okay, for those of you who are not knowing, we've had, like, the population of Ucross has been 25 since 1961. And so, all of a sudden when they resurfaced the road, they're going through Ucross, they put up new signs that said 26. And so it caused a great deal of controversy, I have to admit, like that, because nobody moved in and nobody had a baby. And so it's like, where this 26 person came from? So we're still trying to figure that, assess that particular mystery out. So we'll see what happens. You guys are quiet tonight.
My partner over here is a little shy.
Uh-oh.
She was curious, how do you develop a new character?
Generally, I base them off somebody. I mean, you guys have heard me talk enough times. My favorite quote about writing is the one from Wallace Stegner, the legendary writing teacher at Stanford University, like that, who taught such luminaries as like Larry McMurtry and all these other incredible writers like that. But one of his statements is the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says nobody in this book is based off anybody alive or dead. And he said, what a crock that is. I mean, that's your job, to go find interesting people and put them in your books like that. And so a lot of times it starts with that like that. But I'm always more concerned with the voice of the character than anything else, because I'm always telling students when I do workshops, like, you get to describe the character one time, and that's it. But they're going to speak all the way through that novel. And so if you really want to work on that character and differentiate that character, think about how they speak. So the voice, in many ways, is the first thing that strikes me whenever I'm putting a character together. And then it's kind of like speaking of voice, in many ways, whenever you write a novel, it's kind of like conducting a choral group, I mean, each one of those voices is there for a specific reason. And so, you can't do an opera with all basses or all alto sopranos or something. You have to have different kinds of voices. And you have to think about that, what kind of story you're telling, and then decide, what voices you need to tell that particular story like that. And that's kind of how it all kind of falls into place after that. So it's not quite so bad like that to start from, the ether, if you got a few clues. All the way in the back there.
I was wondering, since you don't write chronologically, that must make it even more complicated to keep track of everything. So how do you keep track?
In all honesty, look at, in all fairness and disclosure, the majority of the books are chronological. The majority of the books in the series, the 20 books, they do follow a chronology. So, I mean, there's always going to be the ones where I'll escape, both geographically, and chronologically. But as a general rule, the majority do follow an arc, where one follows immediately after the other, which is, kind of fun like that, because when the books are only 4 months apart at the most, what happened in the last book, is still echoing, through the book that you're reading now. And the clues for what the next book is going to be are also being threaded in with that too. And so in many ways, I don't really even look at the books as like 20 separate novels. To me, they're all just one big story is what they are, with all interweaving threads, like a tapestry that go back and, and connect with all the previous books. If I'm doing a good enough job that's what should be happening. But yeah, that's kind of important. And then as far as knowing, I spend about 8 hours a day with these characters. I spend more time with these characters than I do my family. And so if I can't keep them straight and know what their histories are, I got a problem on my hands. So I, and it's interesting that, because, I do spend that much time with them that they become like family, and I know them so well. It's a joy to be able to find those little pieces that I put in there earlier on, and then take that piece out and write an entire novel about that one piece of information that we didn't have before. It's fun. So,
Craig, we've seen.
wait a minute. Let's see. We'll do you because you got the mic, and then we'll go to you.
We've seen you stack your wood. When you do things like that around the ranch, do you take a break from these characters and plots, or are they still swirling?
No. It's a pretty great life I've got. I got to admit, because it's a really nice balance between the physical activity of the ranch, like and dealing, with the stock and all the physical activities. I mean, I did 19 cords of firewood, this fall. And that's a lot of firewood like that, which is good because that blizzard is hitting Wyoming right now. And my wife's got to keep those stoves going like that. And so, as I'm down here in Scottsdale, Arizona, like that. And, anyway, that it's nice because, I mean, if I had to sit inside on a chair and type, my whole life, I don't know if I would be able to stick to it as well as I do. But also on the other hand, like, I've done enough physical labor in my life like that I'm glad that I don't have to dig ditches like at a break stock or do fence, to earn a living like that, because it didn't pay that well. That's first of all, like that. And then also it takes pieces out of you after a while too, like that. And so it's kind of nice to have a balance of an intellectual, cerebral world of the writing like that, and then the physical world, of the ranching. Like it's a really kind of a good quality to have. But do those characters ever completely leave me? No, never. I mean, I just, I remembered, when I was writing the short story, I was laying there last night and I was like, wait a minute. There was a picture of one of those starter jars and it had a rubber band on it. Why was that rubber band there? And it's there to show you how much growth you have in the yeast, in the starter and all this. And I was like, that's an important point. I got to put that in the short story, and I'm laying there thinking about the short story for goodness sake. Like, and so it never goes away. It's always there, and competing, jockeying for position, to get information into the books.
Thank you. I was curious. I think a couple Labor Days ago or years ago, you had mentioned maybe doing a one-off type of book with maybe a World War II type of thing.
Yeah.
So where are you in that? I know
I've started all of them. Like I've got one's a psychological thriller, one is a period mystery that takes place during World War II. Then there's a straightforward Western that I've started, which was a really great story that I heard, and I thought, oh, that's a novel right there. So I've got about like 5 or 6 other novels like that I've actually started on. It's just a question of getting the time like to be able to put into them that makes them worthwhile. Because I don't want to just do them just to do them. I want them to be a good book, a really good book. Like the one that you mentioned, I think is the World War II one. I found out that there was a town in Germany called Wolfsangel, which is not the German pronunciation, but it's a German word. But it means hook that you use to capture wolves. And what it's famous for is there was a B-24 Liberator crew that got shot down, and the Gestapo brought them through the town that they had not bombed, but had been bombed the night before by the British. And they took the crew away and hung them. And what happens is this is like at the very end of the war with, the Allies coming from one side, the Russians coming from the other, and this little town, and all of a sudden this guy shows up on an old WLA, Harley Davidson Scout motorcycle. And the reason he's there is his brother was the navigator on that ship, and he's there to find out who it was that killed his brother before the war ends. So, yeah. So...
We have a book club, and believe it or not, there were some people that had never heard of Craig Johnson.
There are lots of them.
And I'm like, what?
But we just got
where
translated
have you
into
been?
Chinese, so we're making headway here like that. So,
Well, because they hadn't, of course, I mentioned Longmire, and some of them had seen the TV show, which was wonderful, and I hated whenever they ended it. Is it coming back? That's one thing, but the thing that I wanted to mention is that we started off with book 1. And I immediately read 2, 3, and 4 right away.
Thank you.
And I'm telling you, can you think of any other way to kill him off? Because and he is like, where was the one where he was like shot and then went into the cold water and was drowned? Really, he actually drowned. And came back up, and they got him going, and he wakes up in the hospital, and
He's tough, isn't
and
he?
He
is
he must
tough.
have a healing thing that I've never heard of. you
That
know?
was one of the things I did when I was composing Walt, because I looked at the cold dish and I thought, man, you're going to do some terrible things to this guy. And I thought he better be big. He better be big and powerful and be able to take a hit, because you're going to do all kinds of horrible things to him. And that was just when I was writing one book. It wasn't even a series at that point in time. It was just a lone book. And thank goodness I made him as big as I did, because my gosh, the only way he'd survive, for goodness sake, after all the things that I've done to him like that. But I don't know. I mean, I'm hard on him. I really am.
tough.
People always ask, they always say, do you want to meet your character someday? And I'm like, no, no, because Walt's going to have it out for me. I got a sneaking suspicion. Those are the two emails that I get after every book. One is you did not have enough of my favorite character, insert name here. There was not enough Lucian. There wasn't enough Henry. There wasn't enough Vic. There wasn't enough Dog, for goodness sake. And then the other one is you really beat up on Walt too much in this last book. You got to take it easy on him in the next one. And so.
Well, and I've always wondered, how was it whenever they came to you about doing this series? How did that come about?
It was interesting like that, because there were a couple of big actors that wanted the cold dish to get the rights to it to make a movie, is what they wanted to do. It's a very interesting list of actors. But Warner Brothers came to me as a studio through CAA, and which is the big agency that puts together producers and actors and directors and makes packages. And so it was more of as Patrick and I were talking about this over in the green room there. If an actor gets your work, then you're stuck with that actor. And I always laugh because Lee Child gets a lot of crap about Tom Cruise, and I remember asking Lee about it, and Lee didn't want to talk about it, and he said, "Hey, you danced with the one that brought you," and it was it was his production company that made the movie, so guess what? He wanted to play the character. Who's going to tell him no, right? And so and whenever they were talking to me about it like that, I remember my agent, my literary agent, she said, this is a deal that's going to get made. This isn't just, rights money that you'll get, every year. This is something that'll actually get made like that. And then that means that there's visibility from all of that. And so, whenever A&E said yes, and everybody jumped on board, I'd be kind of stupid to say no at that point in time. And so they did it. And of course, they did it for 3 years, and it was so successful. It was the highest rated scripted drama they'd ever had. They went to Warner Brothers and said, we want to buy Longmire. And Warner Brothers said, well, it's the highest rated scripted drama in the history of your network. Why would we sell it to you? And they said, well, if you don't, we're going to cancel it. And Warner Brothers said, well, you're going to do what you got to do. And they were stupid and did it and lost 30% of their viewing audience out of the deal. And I remember sitting with Peter Roth and talking to him about it. And I said, well, come on, we've got this show that's getting millions of people watching it every night. Is it really done? Is it over? And he goes, no, we'll get picked up by somebody. And I said, well, where do you think we're going to get picked up by? Now, in my defense, you have to remember this was quite a number of years ago, okay? And he said, well, I think we're going to get picked up by one of these streaming services. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, this is where you can watch television shows and movies, on your phone or on your computer. And I was like, oh, we're dead. That's it. We're never going to be heard from again. Well, that was Netflix. So I'm an idiot. And so don't pay any attention to what I say about any business dealings. And so they picked it up. And here we are 8 years, I think, after they've ceased production, and the show is still one of the top 20 shows on Netflix every other week. And so, thank you. They did a marvelous job. They did a marvelous job. I actually did. They sent me DVDs of the actors' auditions which was really weird because I asked Michael Connelly and Lee Child, and they said they will hand you a check, Craig, and you will never hear from them again. Or, or maybe you'll recognize what you see on the screen, or maybe you won't. It's difficult to say. And then when they started sending me DVDs out of the auditions, I was like, I think I'm in this a little deeper than, maybe I would have thought. So, yes, ma'am.
Well, we know that your characters are with you in your daytime hours. What about at night? Do you ever dream about them?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, and I dream in Technicolor too. Like I mean, it's all there, like all of it, like that, and sometimes it's weird stuff, and we were in Athens, like that, here just about a month ago, and because the book's been translated into Greece too, like in Greek. And we were there, like that, and I mean that night, I remember being at the Acropolis, like at, and walking up to look at the Parthenon, like that, and walked up, and Walt Longmire was sitting on one of the boulders, sitting there looking at it, and he says, "It's a lot bigger than you think it's going to be, isn't it?" Like, and I was like, we had this whole conversation about, the Parthenon, for God's sakes, like that. So it's a little weird. I don't think I'll ever end up in a book, but it was fun. He didn't try and kill me for beating him up so bad, like that. So I guess it was all right. So. Anybody else? Now's your chance. This is the last one. Oh, okay, we'll do two.
On the creek that you're always by and doing the Zen on the 30 seconds. Are you doing, what are you doing to make it so loud? I'm like,
I can't take credit for that. Like, you know what it is? There's no other noise. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, you get up in the Bighorn Mountains, and get next to one of those streams, there's no other noise.
It sounds really loud. I'm like, I'm not getting the Zen part of this because
I can't take credit for that. I guess Apple's doing a pretty good job with the sound of the sound on the phones, because that's all it is. I accomplished not dropping my phone in any of the streams yet. Like that, so I feel pretty comfortable about that. Like that, so I'm pretty happy like that. But yeah, it was two things. Like I did the first one, like and everybody responded to it, and I thought, you know what, there are an awful lot of people that aren't in places where they can, sit by a stream up in the mountains. And I thought that would be kind of nice. Like at every Sunday morning, they get up and there's 30 seconds of just sitting by a creek or on a beach or, watching a pump jack, out in the desert, or something like that they don't normally see, wherever it is that they are. The other thing has been kind of interesting too. Like when I do all these tours in Europe, something strange happens. I'm there for about a week and I find myself going into cathedrals. And I'm not particularly religious, but I am drawn into these cathedrals. And I finally figured out what it was. They're quiet. And that's just going in there and sitting there in the quiet. I need that, on a weekly basis. Like that. And so I think that's, kind of explains a little bit of the popularity of the 30 seconds of Zen, too. So somebody else had their hand up. This lady here, I believe.
Have you always been a storyteller? When you were a kid, did you entertain your family?
No. I was the worst one. I mean, I was in competition with my father, my brother, and my mother, who was the best storyteller in the world. I still have stories that she told that I'm waiting to put in a book, but I didn't have the knack. Like I just didn't, I've gotten better, over the years like that, especially with a lot of these book events and everything. But, that was probably the whole reason why it is that I started writing, was because I couldn't tell stories. So I thought maybe if I write them, maybe I'll have a chance. Okay. And so that's how my whole career probably hinged on that, to be honest with you. So it's probably good that I wasn't a good storyteller, to be honest. So.
Wow, what a perfect note to end on. I love that. So let's give Craig a round of applause. And thank him for sharing his book launch with all of us. Now, before we end, I have a book that I like to give away to thank all of you for coming. And as it happened, by good fortune, Hachette sent me 2 copies of April's David Baldacci book, so I can give one away without actually harming myself. So, John, how many tickets do we do? 39. Okay, so your job is to pick a number between 1 and 39. 13. Oh. That's you. All right. I will. Okay. Wonderful. Good, Ruth. This is a story set in London in 1944. David's been writing some historicals, so you're welcome. I know, love it. So if you guys would be kind enough to stand up and fold up your chairs and move them that way. Craig, you want to sign here? because
wherever you
then,
like me,
well,
wherever
you're at photograph height, so it's kind
Okay.
of better to stay there. So let me remove all the breakables.
Okay.